Here's a quick bonus tutorial. You don't need to understand this before moving on to creating the sheet layers and the viewports, but it'll make working in 3D a lot easier if you do. Let's add a bit of cove molding onto the 6-inch trim at the top of our door. And remember from the add and clip surface video how easy it was to draw a square on, then draw a circle on top, and use clip surface to create the cove molding profile. And you can always draw on the layer plane as we've been doing, and then extrude the shape and then rotate it into place. But there's a much faster way. We can draw the profile right into the spot where we want it by using the automatic mode or the auto plane mode. So far, we've been drawing in top plan and then extruding things up in the Z direction. Remember, there are these three intersecting layer planes. I'm going to jump into the grid snapping preferences for a moment and turn on the 3D axis so you can see what I'm talking about here. I usually have these off, but if they're helpful to you, you can leave them on. I'll pop into top plan view and you can see the rulers. So unless you've set it somewhere else, the 000 origin point of the document will be the page center. And for me, there's a little screen hint, page center, just to the right of my door. Yours might be in a slightly different spot, and that's fine. Just look where the 0 is in the X and Y intersects. And just so you can see it, I'm going to place a 2D locus point. And a locus point tool, locus points are just a pin that you can place into a space. They don't print or do anything other than serve as a kind of a permanent reference point if you want to snap to something in a random spot in your drawing in the future. When I place that 2D locus on that page center hint, and then I look up in the object info, we can see that it's 0 on the X and it's 0 on the Y. It's also 0 on the Z, although it's not showing that here because I used a 2D locus. There are 3D loci as well. Now I'll jump into the right isometric view here and you can see the red, green, and the blue X, Y, Z axis intersecting right at that point. And by the way, the red X and the green Y and the blue Z 3 directions thing is universal in any 3D software. So sometimes the up direction is in the Y axis in some tools, but every 3D software is going to use the X, Y, Z and those colors there. It's not just a Vectorworks thing. Let's look in the front view and we can see that the door is halfway above and below that origin point. And that's because remember when we drew the door flat on the ground on the Z layer plane, we used the Control L command to just rotate it 90 degrees with one click. Rather than using the rotate tool and snapping to the bottom and then rotating it up. So by using that little quick keyboard shortcut, it did use the origin point, the 000 as the pivot point. So that's why half of it is below the floor technically here. But it's not going to matter for our next steps. Now notice that I can draw in the front view as well. And here I'll just draw a rectangle. And then when I switch back to the right ISO view, you can see that it's drawn on that red axis plane. In other words, the 0 depth of the Y axis. It's right there on that 0 plane. And if I switch to the right side view and then snap to the 2D locus and then draw a rectangle, you can see that the corner is right there on the 000 origin. But it's drawn up and to the right on the red axis, and it's perfectly on the 0 of the Y axis there. So it's basically kind of like drawing on 3 pieces of glass with a Sharpie or something like that. So back to the top plan, and I'll do the same thing in this view. When I swing around into an ISO view, you can see that the rectangle is kind of like a floor, and the X and the Y rectangles are kind of like walls. I sped up for a second there and added color to the plane so you can see them better. When you draw something in any view other than front and back on the X plane or right and left on the Y plane, then it will default to the Z layer plane. So the layer plane in this case is just the floor of our sort of infinite scene shop that we're working in. So see how I'm drawing rectangles in the ISO view, and even though it might look like I'm drawing them above the door, they're actually snapping right to the ground. So let me delete all these and let's talk about these working planes. You can create a working plane anywhere you want. There's even a palette for keeping track of multiple saved working planes. That could be really handy, but it's definitely more advanced. But there is a quick temporary mode that's a little easier to use and is extremely helpful, and that's the automatic working plane. So when you select a drawing tool, like the rectangle tool or any tool that can draw on one of these planes, then there's these 2 mode buttons that appear. And I think the auto plane mode is a particularly confusing bit of GUI as it looks like it's supposed to be a checkbox, but it's actually an icon showing a pink working plane directly oriented to the view. So if you hit this button or the backslash key, which is probably on your keyboard between your backspace and your enter or return button, See how that's jumping back and forth between the two modes. But when we're in the auto plane mode and you hover over a 3D surface, the face will turn lavender, showing that you can click and draw directly on that face. And watch as I hover over the door panel and then I click, and I'll just draw a rectangle here, and then I'm just going to extrude that. So if I Control E to extrude it, it's going to extrude it right off of the face of the door panel. And you can do this on any plane that you can make highlight with that lavender color. So let's use the auto mode to draw the 2D profile of our cove molding right where we want it. So I'm going to hit the 4 key on my number pad, or you can use the navigation cube or the middle mouse pie menu or the view drop down. I don't care whichever way you want to go. Just move to the left side view. So I'm going to select the rectangle tool, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm in the auto plane mode. So either click the pink square or use the / key, and you'll see it'll actually add the words there for whichever mode you're in. So now watch as I hover over the side of that 6-inch trim. See how that side is turning purple? That lets you know that it's referencing that face for an auto working plane. So it's kind of like running up there and putting another piece of glass for us to draw on right there aligned with that plane. So if I hover over that face and then I find the corner hint and then I click and I'm going to tab over, I'm going to make it a 2-inch on the X and a -2-inch on the Y. Just make a square there, hit enter. And now I can orbit around to the other side and see that the square is like a little kind of a tab or a flag kind of sticking off right at the edge of the trim there. And you don't even need to be in an orthographic view to do this. I'm going to stay in this angle here that I'm in, and I'm going to grab the circle tool. I'm going to snap to the lower right corner of that second square. Remember, you're looking for that purple lavender colored highlight there. And then I'm going to make a 1.5-inch radius circle right there on that square. And now, because these two objects are drawn in exactly the same plane, it would be almost impossible to do that with the auto plane turned off. It might look like it's in the right spot, but it could be like 50 feet away, and it's just an optical illusion. But when you're working with that auto plane mode, we know that these two objects are in exactly the same plane, so we can do the 2D Boolean operation. We can hit the X key for the selection tool, and then we can shift select the square. Remember, we need them both selected. And with both selected, we can right click on either one of them and pick Clip Surface out of the pop-up list, just like we did when we were drawing them flat on the floor in a few videos back. We can delete the circle. We can just hit backspace or delete. We don't need it anymore. But now we have our 2D cove molding profile exactly where we want it. So I'm going to select it with my X key, and I'm just going to Control or Command E to extrude. And as we want to extrude it away from the camera, away from our view, we need to type in -48 or -4', either one. And then when you click Enter or OK, we now have a piece of cove molding perfectly attached to the top of the flat with no need to rotate it or move it into position. So orbit around a bit with the middle mouse control and drag, or just use the orbit tool. Understanding how layer and working planes work will make modeling in 3D a lot easier.